Today, I'll share an unbelievable story about a wife's betrayal that took an unexpected turn. Lila's hands trembled slightly as she buttoned up her blouse, fingers fumbling over the small pearlescent discs. Glancing at the clock on the bedside table, its glowing red digits informed her it was nearly 1 a.m. She was running late, as usual. Mark would be waiting up for her, no doubt growing more agitated by the minute. With a sigh, Lila grabbed her purse and hurried out of the dim hotel room, not sparing a backwards glance at the rumpled sheets or the man still sprawled naked across the bed, his breathing deep and even in post-coital slumber. Guilt gnawed at her as she rushed down the generic floral carpeted hallway to the elevator, the ding of its arrival abnormally loud in the hushed stillness. As the elevator descended, so did the reality and weight of Lila's actions. The flush of forbidden excitement faded, replaced by the cold dread of knowing she would have to look her husband in the eye and lie, once again. It had become almost second nature over the past few months, the deceit rolling off her tongue with disturbing ease. Working late, drinks with the girls, a last-minute errand. The excuses fell from her lips, each one driving the wedge further between her and Mark. Things had been strained for a while now, even before Lila had embarked on her ill-advised affair with Nate. After 6 years of marriage, she and Mark had settled into a staid routine, the passion steadily leaching from their relationship. Date nights and weekend getaways had been replaced by evenings in front of the TV and perfunctory once-a-week sex. They didn't fight, but they didn't really talk anymore either. They existed together, two people occupying the same space but on separate orbits. When Lila first met Nate, it had been like a jolt to her system, a burst of color in her grayscale world. He made her feel seen and alive in a way Mark no longer did. What began as harmless flirting over lunch breaks and coffee runs gradually intensified into lingering touches and furtive kisses. The first time they slept together, Lila told herself it was a mistake, a one-time thing. But it kept happening, a magnetic pull drawing her into Nate's orbit no matter how much she resisted. Now, 6 months in, the initial thrill had worn off, replaced by a constant low hum of anxiety. Lila knew she was being careless and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. But she felt powerless to stop, craving the way Nate made her feel too much to give it up. The elevator dinged its arrival in the underground parking garage, startling Lila from her spiraling thoughts. She hurried over to her Lexus, heels clacking loudly against the cement, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. The 20-minute drive home passed in a blur, Lila's mind too preoccupied with carefully rehearsing her newest set of excuses and lies to focus on the nearly empty late-night streets. Pulling into the driveway of the mid-century ranch she and Mark called home, Lila saw their bedroom light glowing behind the curtains. Her stomach clenched. There would be no avoiding the conversation awaiting her. Apprehension curdling in her gut, Lila quietly let herself inside, setting her keys in the ceramic dish by the front door with exaggerated care, as if she could avoid detection. But as she turned towards the stairs, Mark emerged from the dark living room, still dressed in his work slacks and buttoned down despite the late hour, his face lined with fatigue and displeasure. "You home late," he stated flatly, arms crossed over his chest. Again, Lila pasted on what she hoped was a regretful smile, the lies automatically springing to her lips. "I know, I am sorry. Things ran longer than expected at work and then I grabbed a quick bite with Kayla afterwards. I should have called." Mark's gaze sharpened, a muscle in his jaw ticking. "You seem to be spending a lot of evenings and weekends, grabbing bites, and working late, recently. Is there something you want to tell me?" Unease prickled along Lila's spine at his probing tone. Did he suspect something? Keeping her face carefully neutral, she stepped forward to lay what she hoped was a soothing hand on his chest. "Of course not," she said, infusing her voice with a light laugh. "You know how busy things get at the agency sometimes. I've just been swamped with the new campaign, that's all. I am sorry I've been neglecting you. Let me make it up to you." Rising on her toes, Lila pressed her lips to his, trying to distract Mark with seduction. For a moment he remained stiff and unyielding against her, but then, with a sigh, his rigid posture relaxed as he returned the kiss, arms coming up to circle her waist. "I don't like this, Lila," he murmured against her mouth. "I feel like I never see you anymore. Like you drifting away from me." Lila's heart clenched with genuine regret and guilt. She did love Mark, even if that love had morphed and faded over the years. She never meant to hurt him. Pulling back, she cupped his face in her hands, tracing the lines of concern etched around his eyes and mouth, lines she was responsible for putting there. "I am right here," she reassured him, injecting sincerity into her words. "I am not going anywhere. Things have just been hectic lately. But I promise I'll make more of an effort for us. No more late nights." Mark searched her face for a long moment before nodding slowly, accepting her placation. "All right, come on, let's go to bed. I am beat." Letting him lead her upstairs, Lila breathed a small sigh of relief. She patched things over for the time being, but she knew it was a flimsy bandage at best. Mark's suspicions had been roused, and she would need to be more careful going forward. As she got ready for bed and slid in next to her husband, the man she pledged herself to for better or worse, Lila resolved to put an end to things with Nate, once and for all. She couldn't keep living a lie. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't fair to Mark or herself. In the dark, listening to the steady rhythm of Mark's breathing, Lila steeled her resolve. Tomorrow, she would do what needed to be done, no matter how difficult. It was time to recommit to her marriage, to try to find her way back to the love and connection she and Mark once shared. With that decided, she finally drifted into a restless, troubled sleep. But even as she made that silent vow to herself, Lila knew, deep down, that it was a promise she likely wouldn't keep. Because despite the guilt, despite the fear and stress and anxiety, being with Nate made her feel vital and alive in a way she hadn't in years. And now that she had a taste of that electrifying passion again, Lila didn't know if she had the strength to give it up. Torn between her marriage and her lover, Lila had no easy choices, only secrets and lies. The next morning dawned bright and clear, sunlight slanting through the curtains to stripe across the bed. Lila groggily opened her eyes, momentarily disoriented until the events of the previous night came rushing back, her late arrival home, the confrontation with Mark, her resolution to end things with Nate. Shame and dread sat heavy as a stone in her stomach. Beside her, Mark's side of the bed was empty, the sheets rumpled and cool to the touch. He must have left for work already. Lila felt a mix of relief and disappointment at the realization. Part of her wanted to talk to him, to assuage the hurt and suspicion in his eyes with reassurances and apologies. But a bigger part was grateful to postpone what was bound to be a difficult conversation. Dragging herself from bed, Lila went through the motions of her morning routine: shower, dress, coffee, the steadying rituals of normalcy. All the while, her thoughts churned with how to extricate herself from the tangled web she woven. Breaking things off with Nate would be painful but necessary. She let herself get swept up in the thrill and passion, let it blind her to the damage she was inflicting on her marriage. It had to stop, but the thought of never again feeling the way he made her feel, so vibrant and adored, made her ache. Lila's phone pinged with an incoming text as she was gathering her things to leave, Nate's name flashing on the screen. Her traitorous heart jumped even as dread unspooled in her stomach. "Missed you last night. When can I see you again?" Such an innocuous message, and yet the implications made Lila's mouth go dry. Fingers trembling slightly, she typed out a response. "We need to talk. Meet me at the park after work?" His reply was almost instantaneous. "I'll be there. Everything okay?" Lila hesitated, thumbs hovering over the screen. She didn't want to do this over text, but she also couldn't stand the thought of him spending the whole day thinking everything was fine, only to have her drop this bombshell on him. "No, not really. I can't do this anymore, Nate. It's not right. I am married." This time, the response was longer in coming. The 3 dots signaling he was typing appeared and disappeared several times. Lila's heart pounded in the tense silence. Finally, a new message appeared. "I know you remarried, but I also know you not happy. We have something special, Lila. Don't throw it away because you feel guilty. You deserve to put yourself first for once." Tears pricked the corners of Lila's eyes. He wasn't playing fair, appealing to her longing to be prioritized, cherished. It was something she hadn't felt in her marriage for a long time. Mark wasn't a bad husband by any means. He was steady, dependable, kind. But somewhere along the way, he stopped making her feel special, like she was the center of his world. They stopped putting each other first. But that didn't make what she was doing okay. Lila knew that. Two wrongs didn't make a right, and she made a commitment to Mark. One she needed to honor. I am sorry, she typed, vision blurring with unshed tears. I never meant for this to happen. But I had to at least try to fix my marriage. I owe it to Mark and to myself. Please understand. She hit send and immediately powered down her phone, not feeling strong enough to handle his response. Wiping her eyes, Lila took a few deep, steadying breaths and headed out the door. She could get through this day. She had to, one foot in front of the other. But as she drove to work, Lila couldn't shake the ache in her chest or ignore the small voice whispering that she was making a mistake. That she was giving up her chance at happiness. By the time 5:00 rolled around, Lila's nerves were stretched taut as a wire, dread and anticipation churning in her stomach as she made her way to the park near her office. She rushed out the door, eschewing her usual post-work routine of tidying her desk and bidding her colleagues good night. She couldn't risk running into Nate at the office, not when she felt one pleading look from him might crumble her resolve. He was already there waiting for her, perched on their usual bench overlooking the small duck pond, his dark head bowed and shoulders tense. He looked up as she approached, eyes searching her face. Lila's heart clenched at the cautious hope she saw there. Lila, he breathed, half rising to meet her. What's going on? Your text freaked me out. Are you ending this? Ending us? She swallowed hard, fighting back the sting of tears. This was so much harder face to face, seeing the pain and confusion in his expression. Part of her longed to smooth it away, to fall into his arms and take comfort in his touch. But she couldn't. She wouldn't let herself. I am so sorry, Nate. But yes, I am. We can I can't keep doing this. It's wrong and I need to fix things with Mark. He stared at her in disbelief, shaking his head slowly. I don't understand. I thought you were going to leave him. For me, for us, we love each other, Lila. Doesn't that count for anything? A sob caught in Lila's throat, her chest constricting painfully. Of course it counts. But sometimes love isn't enough. I made a commitment to my husband and I need to honor that. Even if it means giving you up. Nate surged to his feet, hands gripping her upper arms urgently. His touch burned through the thin fabric of her blouse. You don't have to do this, he implored. We can figure it out. I'll wait for you, however long it takes. Please, Lila, don't give up on us. She squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears tracking down her cheeks. Every word was like a knife to her heart, the temptation to give in, to choose her own happiness for once, almost overwhelming. But the tarnished gold of her wedding band was a cold reminder against her skin, an unignorable weight. I can she whispered brokenly. I am sorry, Nate. I am so sorry. But I have to let you go. Pulling away from him was the hardest thing Lila had ever done. It felt like ripping away a piece of her own soul, leaving it raw and bleeding. Nate stood with his arms still outstretched, face crumpled with anguish. Lila, please, he rasped. Don't do this. We can make it work. But she was already backing away, vision blurred with tears. Goodbye, Nate. Then she turned and fled, his plaintive cries chasing her across the grass. Each step was agony, as if she was fighting against a magnetic pull back to him. But Lila forced herself to keep going, to put one foot in front of the other. With every stride, she felt a piece of her heart break off and shrivel. By the time she reached her car, Lila was openly weeping, shoulders shaking with the force of her sobs. Collapsing into the driver's seat, she sat and cried until no more tears would come, her eyes swollen and throat raw. She felt scraped out, hollow. In extracting Nate from her life, it was as if she carved out all the vibrant color as well. She told herself it was for the best, that she was doing the right thing. But it didn't ease the aching void his loss had left behind. Lila drove home in a daze, barely aware of the traffic around her or the streets she passed. She felt untethered, numb. Only the dull, throbbing ache in her chest tethered her to reality. Pulling into the driveway, she noted Mark's car was already there. He was home early for once. Panic fluttered through her, her first instinct to flee, to avoid the conversation awaiting her. But Lila forced it down. She couldn't keep running from this. It was time to face the consequences, even if the very thought filled her with dread. The house was quiet when she entered, only a single lamp casting the living room in soft shadows. Lila found Mark at the kitchen table, bent over a stack of bills, a glass of scotch at his elbow. He looked up at her entrance, brows drawn together in confusion at her disheveled appearance, the redness rimming her eyes. "Lila?" he questioned. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She opened her mouth but nothing emerged, her throat closing around the words. How could she possibly explain? The truth would shatter him. But she was so tired of lies. "Mark, She started, her voice cracking. A tear slipped down her cheek. "We need to talk." Mark stared at her, the concern on his face slowly morphing into apprehension as he took in Lila's grave expression, the tears glistening on her cheeks. He set down the bill he'd been perusing, giving her his full attention. "What is it?" he asked warily. "What's going on?" Lila twisted her fingers together, nausea churning in her stomach. She rehearsed this moment countless times in her head, but now, faced with the reality, the words stuck in her throat like shards of glass. She swallowed convulsively, forcing herself to meet Mark's increasingly anxious gaze. "I've been lying to you," she began, her voice trembling. "All those late nights at work, the weekends away. I wasn't where I said I was." Mark went very still, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "What are you saying, Lila?" She squeezed her eyes shut, unable to look at him as she forced out the damning truth. "I've been having an affair." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Lila waited with bated breath for his reaction, for anger, for recriminations, for disgust. But there was only a beat of terrible, endless silence. Finally, she opened her eyes. Mark was staring at her numbly, face drained of color, eyes hollow with shock and betrayal. He looked as if she'd reached inside his chest and torn out his heart. In a way, she supposed she had. "Who?" he asked finally, the single syllable falling like a stone between them. Lila flinched, fresh tears spilling over. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She looked away, unable to hold his devastated gaze a moment longer. "His name is Nate. We work together." Mark exhaled sharply, as if she'd landed a physical blow. He scrubbed a hand over his face, shoulders slumping. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with pain. "How long?" The question was like salt in an open wound. Lila's heart twisted with the knowledge of just how deeply she'd betrayed him, how long she'd been lying to his face. 6 months, she whispered. "I am so sorry, Mark. I never meant for this to happen. It got out of control." He barked a harsh, disbelieving laugh. "Out of control? Is that what you call fucking another man behind my back for half a year?" "Christ, Lila." He shoved away from the table to pace the kitchen, agitation vibrating off him in waves. Lila watched helplessly, hugging her arms around herself. "Do you love him?" Mark bit out, not looking at her. The question hung in the air, weighty with implication. Lila hesitated, throat working. She knew her answer had the power to make or break them. I thought I did," she admitted hoarsely. Mark stiffened, hands clenching into fists at his sides. Lila rushed on, desperate to lance the wound clean. "But I realize now it wasn't real. It was an escape, a distraction from our problems. I ended it, Mark. Today, I choose you, I choose us." He whirled to face her, eyes blazing with hurt and fury. "And I am supposed to, what? Forgive you? Take you back like nothing happened? Like you didn't just detonate our entire marriage?" Lila shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "No, of course not. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did, it's unforgivable. I betrayed you in the worst possible way. I am so sorry, Mark. More sorry than I can ever express." The fight seemed to drain out of him then, his broad shoulders slumping as if under a terrible weight. He looked diminished, defeated. It shattered something in Lila to know she'd done that to him. "I just don't understand," he said, quiet anguish threading his voice. "Why? Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? I thought we were happy." Lila crossed to him, aching to reach out but unsure of her welcome. She settled for gripping the back of a chair, white-knuckled. "It wasn't you," she said thickly. "You didn't do anything wrong, Mark. This is on me, my weakness, my selfishness. Nate made me feel alive again, desired. Like I was the center of someone's world. She saw the exact moment realization clicked for him, a bitter laugh escaping. So you saying it's my fault for not paying enough attention to you? For working hard to give you the life you said you wanted? No, Lila refuted vehemently. I am not blaming you. I am just trying to explain. I know it's not an excuse, but somewhere along the way I started feeling neglected, taken for granted. Like we lost sight of each other, stopped making an effort. Mark stared at her, eyes glassy with unshed tears. The ache in Lila's chest sharpened, stealing her breath. She wanted so badly to go to him, to wrap him in her arms and take away the hurt she caused. But she knew her touch would be unwelcome now, salt in the wound. I never stopped loving you, Lila, he said hoarsely. Even if I didn't always show it well, you were always my priority. I thought we were partners, a team. I didn't think I had to keep proving myself, keep competing for your attention. His words cut deep, flaying open the shame and regret filling her chest. You weren't it wasn't a competition. I know I made a choice, one that I'll regret for the rest of my life. But it was never about not loving you. I do love you, Mark. So much. He looked away, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. I don't know if that's enough anymore. Lila felt the earth tilt beneath her feet, panic clawing up her throat. What are you saying? His eyes, when they met hers, were dull with resignation and pain. I am saying, I don't know if I can get past this. If I can ever look at you again without wondering where you are, who you with, if you lying to me. Tears blurred Lila's vision, her worst fears materializing in front of her. She was losing him. He was slipping right through her fingers because of her own selfish, destructive choices. The unfairness of it, the cruel irony, made her want to scream. Mark, please, she begged. Don't give up on us. I know I have no right to ask, but please. I'll do anything to make this right. To earn back your trust. Just tell me what you need. He stared at her for a long, agonizing beat. She could see the war waging behind his eyes, love battling against anger and betrayal. Hope, fragile and iridescent, unfurled tentatively in her chest. I need time, he said finally, each word sounding as if it was scraped over broken glass. I need space to process this, to decide if I can forgive you, if we can move forward. I am going to stay with my brother for a while. The tiny wings of hope withered and died, replaced by desolation. Lila wanted to protest, to plead with him not to leave. But she knew she had no right, not after what she done. If this was what he needed, she had to respect it, as much as it killed her. Okay, she whispered, fighting back a fresh wave of tears. I understand. Take all the time you need. Mark nodded jerkily, not quite meeting her eyes. He hesitated a moment longer, as if wanting to say more. In the end, he simply grabbed his keys and walked out without another word, the soft click of the door closing behind him sounding deafening in the horrible silence left behind. Lila stood frozen, staring at the spot he'd been long after he was gone. She felt hollowed out, scraped raw, the last tattered shreds of her composure crumbling. A sob tore loose from her chest, then another, until she was crumpling to the floor, weeping with great, heaving shudders that shook her entire frame. What had she done? How could she ever repair the damage she wrought, earn back Mark's trust and love? She'd been so stupid, so reckless with both of their hearts. And for what? A few stolen moments of passion, a temporary escape from her dissatisfaction? God, she'd thrown away everything for a lie, an illusion. And she had no one to blame but herself. Lila cried until she was spent, slumped on the cold tile, throat raw and eyes burning. She felt brittle, utterly depleted. The exhaustion dragged at her, the events of the day crashing down with merciless intensity. Lila didn't have the strength to pull herself up, to face the ruins of the life she so carelessly shattered. So she simply curled up on the floor, arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to hold the broken pieces in place, and let the blessed numbness of sleep claim her. Tomorrow she would pick herself up, would start the long, arduous task of atoning for her sins and fighting for her marriage. But tonight, she would mourn, for Mark, for herself, for the love she trampled in her selfish folly. Tonight, she would let herself break. The next few weeks passed in a haze of misery and loneliness for Lila. She went through the motions of her life, work, home, sleep, repeat, but it all felt hollow, meaningless without Mark. His absence was a constant, throbbing ache, an emptiness that couldn't be filled no matter how she tried to distract herself. True to his word, he had gone to stay with his brother Eric, needing time and distance to process Lila's betrayal and decide if their marriage could be salvaged. He wasn't returning her calls or texts, a silence that felt like a knife twisting in her heart with every unanswered rain. Lila knew she had no one to blame but herself. She shattered Mark's trust, broken their wedding vows in the most egregious way possible. She couldn't expect him to just forgive and forget, to welcome her back with open arms as if nothing had happened. But God, she missed him. Missed his solid presence, his quick wit, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was the only woman in the world. She even missed the things that used to annoy her, the way he'd leave his socks on the floor, his endless football marathons on Sundays. What she wouldn't give now to have him back, flaws and all. Work was its own special kind of torture. Having to see Nate every day, to sit in meetings with him and make polite conversation when all she wanted to do was run and hide. It was excruciating. To his credit, he was respecting her wishes, keeping his distance both personally and professionally. But Lila could feel the weight of his gaze on her when he thought she wasn't looking, could see the longing and resentment warring in his eyes. It made her feel cheap, tawdry. Like their affair had cheapened her somehow, turned her into the kind of woman she always looked down on, a cheater, a liar, someone who threw away a good man for selfish, fleeting gratification. The guilt and shame were eating her alive. Late one evening, after another soul-crushing day of navigating the minefield of her workplace and the oppressive silence of her too-empty house, Lila hit rock bottom. She was on her third glass of wine, staring numbly at the TV, when a sudden, visceral wave of loneliness crashed over her. She ached for Mark with an intensity that stole her breath, a yawning, ragged need that clawed at her insides. Before she quite knew what she was doing, Lila was dialing his number with unsteady fingers. She knew it was a mistake, knew he needed more time. But she was drowning in her misery, desperate for even the sound of his voice. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Lila was just about to end the call when the line clicked and Mark's terse voice filled her ear. "What do you want, Lila?" She closed her eyes, tears leaking from beneath her lids at the weariness, the resignation in his tone. She put that there, the defeat that weighed down his every word. I just needed to hear your voice," she said thickly. She heard his sharp intake of breath, could practically see him scrubbing a hand over his jaw in agitation the way he always did when he was upset. "Lila," he sighed, "I told you I needed space." "I know," she rushed out. "I know and I am sorry. I miss you, Mark. So much. I know I have no right, not after what I did. But I love you and I am so sorry and I would do anything to take it back." There was a long, heavy pause. Lila's heart pounded in the silence, hope and dread warring with crippling intensity. When Mark finally spoke, his voice was strained, as if each word was being dragged from him against his will. "I don't know what you want me to say, Lila. I am still so angry. I look at our wedding pictures and all I can think is that the whole time you were up there pledging to love me forever, you were screwing him behind my back. Do you have any idea what that's like? How much that kills me?" Lila flinched as if he slapped her. Ugly, wrenching sobs were building in her chest, but she didn't deserve the release they would bring. She deserved every ounce of his anger, his disgust. "I am so sorry," she choked out. "If I could go back, if I could undo it, I swear I would. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you so much. But you did hurt me," Mark countered, an edge creeping into his voice. They destroyed us, Lila. Shattered every bit of faith and trust I had in you, in our marriage. Love's not going to magically fix that." His words felt like a death blow, the last fragile shard of hope splintering in her chest. Lila bit down hard on her lip, tasting copper as she fought back the desperate pleas rising in her throat. Begging wouldn't help, would likely only push him farther away. She lost the right to fight for him the moment she let Nate into her bed, into her heart. "I should go," Mark said tiredly. Lila could hear the exhaustion in his voice, could practically feel it seeping through the phone. The weight of her betrayal, of the choice she forced him to make. Will you ever be able to forgive me?" she whispered. A desperate, terrified part of her had to know, even if the answer destroyed her. Another weighted pause. She could hear Mark breathing on the other end, could picture him squeezing his eyes shut the way he did when he was weighing his words carefully. "I don't know," he said finally, honestly. "I want to. God, Lila, I want to because even after everything, I still love you. You, my wife, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But I just don't know if I can get past this. If I can ever look at you again without seeing you with him." A broken sob escaped her then, the pain of it ripping through her like shrapnel. She pressed her free hand to her mouth, shoulders shaking with the force of holding back her tears. "I understand," she managed to say around the boulder in her throat. And she did. She understood that she'd committed an unforgivable betrayal, shattered their marriage vows in a way that he might never recover from. She understood that she'd done this, broken the man she loved most in this world. I should let you go," she forced out. "I am sorry for calling, for pushing. I needed you to know how much I regret what I've done. How desperately I wish I could take it back." "I know," Mark said softly, and she could hear the ache in his voice, the longing he was trying so hard to smother. "I am sorry too, Lila. For my part in letting us drift so far apart. Take care of yourself, okay?" Then he was gone, the dial tone droning in her ear. Lila let the phone slip from her numb fingers, curling in on herself as the sobs she'd been holding back broke free. She cried like she was coming apart at the seams, like her very soul was shattering. She'd ruined everything. Through her own weakness, her own selfishness, she'd destroyed her marriage, the one person who meant more to her than anything. And she had no idea if she could ever make it right again. Lila didn't know how long she lay there, weeping until her throat was raw and her eyes burned. Long enough for the room to fall into shadow, for the last of the wine to congeal bitterly on her tongue. Long enough for the shards of her broken heart to lodge themselves so deep, she didn't know if she'd ever get them out. When her tears were spent, her grief wrung dry, Lila dragged herself to her feet. She felt ancient, brittle as an old bone. But beneath the heartache, the desolation, a new resolve had taken root. She'd made this bed and now she had to lie in it. She couldn't force Mark's forgiveness, no matter how desperately she craved it. All she could do was focus on forgiving herself, on becoming a better person, someone worthy of a second chance should Mark decide to grant her one. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long and winding, thick with brambles of guilt and regret. But Lila was determined to walk it, to claw her way back to the woman she used to be, the woman Mark had fallen in love with all those years ago. Even if it took the rest of her life, even if Mark never softened towards her again, Lila vowed to do the work, to earn her redemption however she could. It was the very least she owed herself, owed the vows she'd shattered so carelessly. And maybe, if she was very lucky, the broken pieces of her marriage could be reformed into something new, something stronger. Maybe, through the crucible of her betrayal and atonement, she and Mark could find their way back to each other again. Lila clung to that fragile hope as she finally dragged herself to bed, praying that it would be enough to sustain her through the difficult days to come. The days bled into weeks, the weeks into months, and still Lila heard nothing from Mark. She threw herself into her work, into therapy, into the painful process of self-reflection and atonement, but the ache of his absence never fully abated. It was a constant, throbbing presence, a phantom limb she could never fully ignore. She saw Nate at the office, of course. It was unavoidable. But they kept their interactions strictly professional, a brittle politeness masking the awkward tension simmering beneath the surface. Lila could tell he was struggling with her decision to end things, could see the longing and resentment warring in his eyes when he looked at her. But he respected her choice, kept his distance even as she knew a part of him hoped she would change her mind. She wouldn't, couldn't, whatever temporary madness had driven her into his arms. Lila knew now with bone-deep certainty that it had been a mistake. A devastating, life-altering mistake that she would regret for the rest of her days. Nate wasn't her future. He never had been. He was an escape, a band-aid she tried to slap over the hemorrhaging wound of her dying marriage instead of doing the hard work of stitching it closed. And look where that had gotten her, alone, drowning in guilt and self-recrimination. The man she loved more than life itself driven away by her selfish choices. But Lila was determined to be better, to do better. She poured herself into therapy, peeling back the layers of her psyche to examine the root of her discontent, the restless itch that had driven her to seek validation and excitement outside the bounds of her marriage. It was painful, brutally honest work, but for the first time in a long time, Lila felt like she was waking up, shedding the fog of complacency and entitlement that had settled over her life. She started volunteering at a local women's shelter, throwing herself into fundraising and advocating for those who had lost everything to addiction, to abuse, to the myriad misfortunes that could derail a life. It gave her a sense of purpose, a reason to crawl out of bed on the days when the weight of her mistakes felt like it would crush her. Slowly, painfully, Lila started putting the pieces of herself back together. It was a jarring process, looking at herself, really looking, and acknowledging all the ways she failed. As a wife, as a partner, as a woman. But with each realized flaw, each owned mistake, she could feel herself getting stronger, growing into someone she actually recognized in the mirror again. The only piece still missing was Mark. Lila ached for him, dreamed of him. Some nights she'd wake with her hands reaching for him, his name on her lips, only to find his side of the bed cold and empty. The loss of him was a constant, throbbing pain, one she knew she wholly deserved. But as the weeks stretched into months with no word, no sign that he was softening towards her, Lila began to despair that her betrayal had shattered something irreparable between them. Until one evening, as the city began to glow with the neon promise of another restless night, Lila answered a knock at her door to find Mark standing on her threshold. For a moment, she simply stared, convinced she was conjuring him from the desperate longing of her thoughts. He looked thinner, exhaustion bruising the skin beneath his eyes, but he was still the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Emotion clogged her throat, hot and thick, her hands trembling with the force of holding herself back from reaching for him. "Mark," she managed, his name emerging as hardly more than a rasp. What are you doing here?" He shifted his weight, hands shoved deep in his pockets as he met her gaze with eyes that were wary and hesitant, but blessedly free of the anger and betrayal that had haunted her for months. "I was hoping we could talk," he said, the words tender as a bruise. "Can I come in?" Lila nodded numbly, stepping back to let him pass. He moved into the apartment that had once been theirs, his presence filling up all the empty spaces Lila had been rattling around in for months. She led him to the couch, perching stiffly on the edge of the cushion, hands clasped white-knuckled in her lap to hide their shaking. How have you been?" she asked, immediately wincing at the inanity of the question. How did she think he'd been, with her infidelity spread between them like shattered glass? But Mark just shrugged, a wry twist to his mouth. "They've been better," he said honestly. "But they also been worse. It's been a process." Lila nodded jerkily, guilt rising like bile in her throat. "I am so sorry, Mark. I know they said it 1,000 times, but I'll say it 1,000 more. I am so incredibly sorry for what I did to you, to us. If I could take it back." He held up a hand, stopping the desperate flood of her words. "I know, Lila. I know you're sorry. And I believe you. I didn't for a long time. I couldn't see past my own anger and pain long enough to acknowledge yours. But they had a lot of time to think these past few months. To process everything that happened and try to understand how we got to that point." Lila stared at him, hardly daring to breathe. Was he saying what she desperately hoped he was saying? Could he possibly be offering her a second chance, an opportunity to atone? "I am not saying it's going to be easy," Mark continued, his voice rough with barely restrained emotion. "You broke my heart, Lila. Shattered my trust in a way I wasn't sure was survivable. But I realized something, during all those sleepless nights at Eric's, staring at the ceiling and picking apart every moment of our marriage. I realized that I wasn't blameless either." Lila opened her mouth to protest, to shoulder the full weight of her betrayal, but he barreled on before she could speak. "I let myself get complacent. I stopped putting in the effort, stopped making you feel seen and cherished and desired. I put all my energy into my job, into keeping up the lifestyle we built, and I neglected the most important thing, you." Tears were slipping down Lila's cheeks by the end of his confession, her breath catching on the desperate hope unfurling in her chest. Could he really mean it? Could he really be willing to forgive her, to try again? "I am not saying what you did was okay," Mark clarified, the sternness in his voice dragging her from the spiral of her thoughts. "It wasn't It was a massive betrayal, one that I am still struggling to come to terms with. But I also have to acknowledge my role in pushing you away, in making you feel like you had to look elsewhere for the emotional connection you needed. I never meant to hurt you, Lila whispered thickly. I know that doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I never set out to deceive you or destroy our marriage. I got lost. I made a mistake and then I didn't know how to take it back, how to find my way back to you. Mark nodded slowly, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. I know. And I know I can't just snap my fingers and forget what happened. It's going to take time and work to rebuild what we lost. But Lila, I am willing to try if you are. I still love you, despite everything. And I am not ready to give up on us just yet. A sob caught in Lila's throat, her entire body trembling with the force of her relief, her desperate, aching hope. I love you too, she managed, the words tearing themselves free. I never stopped. And I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life making this up to you, being the wife, the partner you deserve. I'll do whatever it takes, for however long it takes. I need you, Mark. I need you. And then he was reaching for her and she was falling into his arms, the rightness of it, the relief, staggering. Lila clung to him as great, shuddering sobs worked their way free of her chest, the months of guilt and loneliness and longing pouring out of her. Mark held her through it, his own tears dampening her hair, his heart beating a painfully familiar cadence against her cheek. It wasn't perfect. The raw ache of her betrayal still throbbed between them, a wound that would take time and care to fully heal. They had so much still to unpack, so many difficult conversations and even more difficult realizations ahead of them. But it was a start, a fragile, tenuous thread of hope glimmering in the darkness. And as Lila held onto her husband, breathed him in, she felt for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, they would find their way back to each other again. That with time and effort and unwavering commitment, they could rebuild something real and lasting from the ashes of their shattered marriage. It wouldn't be easy. It would take everything they had, every ounce of love and devotion and determination. But in that moment, wrapped in Mark's arms, their tears mingling as they clung to each other, Lila knew it would be worth it. Because this, right here, this imperfect, messy, beautiful love they built and almost lost? It was worth fighting for, worth bleeding for. And Lila would go to war for it, every single day, for the rest of her life if that's what it took. They had a long road ahead of them. But they would walk it together, hand in hand, step by painful step. And maybe, if they were very lucky, they would find their way back to the unshakable foundation of love and trust and partnership they once built their lives upon. It was a start, and for now, it was enough. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you all enjoyed it and learned from it. I appreciate your likes. Also, don't forget to subscribe and comment on the video. See you soon.